The silence of the night had always brought me a certain peace, even when everything was burning in fire in Los Angeles, in that damn fire that destroyed part of the building where I worked. Working as a night security guard in a corporate building in Los Angeles wasn't the job of my dreams, but it was easy money. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. All I had to do was monitor the cameras, patrol the hallways a few times, and make sure everything stayed locked. Nothing too crazy. At least that's what I thought. The building was under reconstruction, ready to be handed over after the wildfire that occurred in January 2025 in the city. It was one of those modern skyscrapers, imposing during the day, but at night, when the lights went off and the hallways were empty, it took on a different atmosphere, one that didn't feel right. The upper floors, in particular, had a strange energy, like something there didn't like to be disturbed. But the worst of it all was Martin. Martin was the night shift janitor, and from day one, something about him unsettled me. He must have been in his 60s, with thin gray hair and a way of walking that made no sound at all. He always appeared out of nowhere, without warning, as if he were watching me the whole time. When we crossed paths in the hallways, he would just nod and continue on his way, never making small talk. At first, I thought he was just a reserved guy, but then strange things started happening. The first time that night, I was doing my usual round when I saw him. He was on the 16th floor, standing in an empty office, staring out the window. The lights were off, but the hallway lighting revealed his silhouette. He wasn't cleaning. He wasn't moving. Just standing. His reflection in the glass seemed wrong, like he was moving in a way that his body wasn't. "Martin, are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't turn around, he didn't even blink. He just kept staring at the glass. I waited a few seconds, hoping for some response, but nothing. The unease settled deep in my stomach. That was the first time I felt that something was really wrong with Martin, but it wouldn't be the last. The following weeks only reinforced the feeling that something was seriously wrong with that building. I would find Martin in places he shouldn't have been. The janitor had his designated areas, but sometimes I'd see him wandering the upper floors, always at odd hours. And the worst part, he disappeared. I'd turn a corner and see his silhouette reflected in the glass doors, but when I'd get there, no one was around. I started convincing myself I was just being paranoid. The solitude of the night shift can mess with your mind. But then the events went from strange to impossible. It all started with the cameras. One night, I was monitoring when I noticed static interference on one of the hallway cameras. It wasn't uncommon for the cameras to fail every once in a while. But then, the static cleared, and Martin appeared. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, motionless, staring at something out of the camera's angle. He wasn't sweeping, he wasn't moving. He was just there. The screen flickered again, and when it came back, he was gone. I stared at the monitor for a long time, waiting for him to reappear, but he didn't. I grabbed my radio and called out to him. "Martin, are you on the ground floor now?" Silence. It shouldn't have bothered me that much. But something about that scene, the way he appeared and disappeared, made fear settle deep inside me, and then things started disappearing. First, it was small items from my desk, a pen, then my ID badge. I thought maybe I had left them somewhere else. But then, a few nights later, I found my things in places I would never have left them. One of the cleaning supply closets on the 10th floor, which I never used. The emergency staircase, where no one ever passed. How did they get there? Why? My mind began to work against me. I wanted to believe everything had a logical explanation. But fear started seeping into my body like poison, slow and persistent. And then came the night when everything changed. It was just after 2 a.m. when I saw Martin on the cameras again. This time, he was in the basement near the maintenance room. He never went down there. And the most terrifying detail, he had his hand on a door I had never seen open before. This time, I wasn't just going to watch. I grabbed my flashlight and went after him. The basement of the building was different from the upper floors. The air was colder, and the sound of the ventilation system created a constant hum, as if the building was whispering. My boots echoed on the concrete floor as I made my way down the narrow hallway. When I reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Martin wasn't there. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The maintenance room was exactly as it should be. Shelves with tools, cleaning products, spare parts. But something was off. One detail caught my attention. At the back of the room, behind a metal shelf, there was another door. A door that looked too old to belong to the modern building. My heart raced. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn around and never look back. But something stronger, curiosity, maybe fear of not knowing the truth, made me continue. I shoved the shelf aside and stared at the door. It had no handle, just an old lock and a worn plaque that read, "Restricted access, authorized personnel only." I shouldn't have opened that door, but I opened it. The moment the lock clicked and the door creaked open, a strong odor hit me. A smell of dampness, rust, and something else. Something metallic. Something that made me hold my breath and hesitate before taking the first step into the darkness. The light from my flashlight flickered as I entered the hidden room. The metallic smell grew stronger, sticking to my throat. It was a narrow basement with cracked, damp concrete walls. The floor was covered in dust and dark stains I preferred not to identify. The worst part was what I found at the back of the room. Shelves filled with personal belongings. Old photographs, watches, wallets, clothes folded into disorganized piles, yellowed papers with incomprehensible scribbles, and then I saw something that made the floor seem to vanish beneath my feet. A box. Inside it, bundles of hair. Small, cut short. Some blonde, some brown, some red. Next to it, a pile of children's clothes. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the items, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who were these people? That's when I noticed the frame, fallen beside the box. I picked it up with shaking hands, and beneath the accumulated dust, I saw an old photo. Martin was in it, younger, with dark hair, standing next to a woman and 3 children. They were all smiling. My heart pounded in my chest when I heard a noise behind me. A creak, like wood groaning. I turned quickly and saw the basement door closing. I ran, but before I could reach it, it slammed shut with a deafening thud. I tried to open it, but it was locked. Then I heard the breathing, low, rasping, and footsteps. Outside, Martin was there. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice calm, unhurried. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the flashlight. "What is this, Martin?" I asked, my voice choking on terror. "My memories," he chuckled softly. "I like to keep the things that matter to me." Suddenly, something struck my mind like lightning. The number of items, the children's clothes, the sheer volume. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a memorial. And I had just locked myself inside it with a predator. Martin began tapping on the door lightly, as if he were toying with the tension. "You wanted answers, didn't you?" he whispered. "Now you'll have to listen." Panic surged through me, but I couldn't lose control. My only chance was to find another way out. I scanned the room, a ventilation grate in the left corner. Small but maybe wide enough for me to fit. Heart pounding, I dragged one of the boxes over to reach the grate and started unscrewing it with my trembling hands. Outside, Martin laughed. "This won't save you." I ignored him. Focused on the screws. One had already come loose. 2 more to go. Martin began to force the door. "I always knew you were too curious. Just like the others?" The others? I didn't want to think about the meaning of that. I yanked out the last screw and pulled the grate away. The hole was tight, but I had no choice. The door creaked. He was forcing it. I pushed my body through the vent, crawling over the cold metal, the echo of my movements reverberating through the narrow space. The air smelled of rust and mold. Then I heard the crash. Martin had broken through the door. My heart stopped for a second. I crawled as fast as I could, ignoring the scratches on my elbows, the metal cutting into my skin. Then I heard his furious scream echo through the vent. "You think you can escape?" He moved. He entered the vent. My body was drenched in sweat as I saw the exit just ahead. A grated vent leading to the maintenance hallway. Forcing every muscle, I gave one last push and kicked the grate. It fell with a deafening thud. I threw myself out and ran. The corridors of the basement seemed endless, but I knew exactly where I needed to go. The elevator. The vent door behind me moved. He was coming. I ran with everything I had, every muscle in my body burning. I reached the elevator and pressed the button frantically. The seconds felt like eternity. I heard Martin emerging from the vent. Then the elevator opened. I threw myself inside and repeatedly pressed the ground floor button. I saw his silhouette turn the corner, coming toward me. The door started to close. His eyes met mine. And then, before the door sealed, he smiled. A long, slow smile. The last thing I heard before the elevator ascended was his low voice, filled with something that made me sick. "I'll find you." The aftermath. I called the police as soon as I got out of the building. They scoured the place and found the hideaway in the basement. Photographs, objects, hair, clothes. But Martin had disappeared. The investigation revealed something worse. The items belonged to missing people over the years. Many children. Some calls were made, and some families found answers they didn't want. But Martin, he was never found. I quit the next day. Never worked the night shift again. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is too silent, I swear I hear footsteps echoing behind me. And I wonder if one day, when I least expect it, Martin will finally find me. I was alone on the night shift at the hotel, organizing the guest records, when I heard a man at the front desk say, "I'm going to kill you," and smiled. That damn smile was scarier than the threat itself. My body froze for a moment. There was no one else in that damn hotel. The clock read 1:47 a.m. The hotel was practically empty, only 9 rooms occupied. It was a cheap motel, used by travelers passing through or after the hurricane that hit the area months ago, by a few people still with nowhere else to go. What the hell? What does this psychopath want from me? I thought to myself. The glass counter was the only thing between me and that man. He tilted his head to the side as if studying my reaction. The fluorescent light in the reception flickered, casting strange shadows on his face. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Sir, I think it's better if you leave." My voice came out shakier than I wanted. He kept smiling. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. All I could hear was the distant hum of the refrigerator in the lobby. I grabbed the phone behind the counter and dialed 9911, leaving the call open. The operator asked what the emergency was, and before I could answer, the man slapped his hand on the glass, making a sharp sound that echoed through the empty lobby. "Do you think the police will get here in time?" he whispered, still smiling. The operator on the other end repeated, "Ma'am, what is the emergency? There's a man threatening me at the front desk of the Blue Pines Inn, off Exit 8 on the Charleston Highway, South Carolina. He's saying he's going to kill me." The man started laughing, really laughing, as if he had just heard the best joke in the world. Then he simply turned around and walked out through the glass door, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. I stood there, the phone trembling in my hand. The operator asked if I wanted a patrol car to come, but I knew that by the time they arrived, he'd be long gone. So, stupidly, I said I didn't need one. I went back to the staff room, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I could still feel that gaze on me. At 2:10 a.m., I heard a noise coming from the lobby. My heart raced. I slowly left the room, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I looked at the front desk, the damn tourist pamphlets were scattered all over the floor, as if someone had swiped the counter and thrown everything onto the ground. The front door was closed, but the feeling that someone was there was suffocating. I checked the security cameras. The grainy screen showed the entrance, the parking lot, and the hotel's hallways. No sign of him. But then on the camera for the third-floor hallway, something made me freeze. The man was standing there, motionless, with his back to the camera, and holding something in his hand. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't have a room on that floor. I knew that. I knew all the guests for that night. The phone rang. I jumped in place, my heart exploding in my chest. I grabbed the phone, expecting to hear the police's voice, or perhaps a frightened guest, but the voice on the other end filled me with pure horror. It was him. "You should have called the police." The phone fell from my hand. And then the power went out. Darkness consumed the hotel. The only sound was the hum of absolute silence. No TVs on in the rooms, no plumbing noises, no sign of life other than my own shallow breaths. The camera monitor went dark along with the lights. I was completely blind. The phone. My God, the phone. I knelt down behind the counter, fumbling blindly until I found the device. The redial button must have still been activated. My fingers trembled as I pressed it. Nothing. No signal. It was him. That thought raced through my mind like an electric shock. He cut the power. The only source of light came from the street, shining through the glass door and casting long shadows on the floor, shadows that could move at any moment. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow, controlled, in the lobby hallway. I knew the front desk door was locked, but was the electronic locking system for the rooms still working without power? My mind spiraled into paranoia. I needed to hide. Behind the counter? No. Too easy. He'd find me in seconds. In the staff room? Maybe. But what if the door made noise when it closed? And then I remembered. The supply closet next to the staff bathroom. Small, suffocating, but safe. And it had a manual lock. The footsteps grew closer. My adrenaline kicked into overdrive. I crouched, crawling as silently as I could, not daring to rise. If he saw me, I was dead. I touched the closet handle and turned it slowly. The door opened without a sound. I slipped inside, closed it gently behind me, and locked it. Then the footsteps stopped, right in front of the door. The only thing separating me from him was a thin piece of wood. He knew. He knew I was there. I stayed still, holding my breath. The silence stretched to the point of madness. Seconds felt like minutes. Then he started whispering, "I know you're in there." My entire body froze. "I can hear you breathing." I pressed my hand to my mouth, forcing it closed to stifle any sound. Then he started scratching the door. Slowly, meticulously. I could feel every hair on my body stand on end, every cell in my skin begging me to do something. But I couldn't run. If I ran, he'd catch me. And then the police siren pierced the darkness. Red and blue lights flashed through the hotel entrance. The man's footsteps vanished. I heard a dull thud. It sounded like him running. And then, absolute silence. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, not knowing if I was really safe. But then the sound of walkie-talkies and the firm voices of police officers echoed through the lobby. "Charleston Police Department, is anyone here?" I rushed out of the closet as fast as my legs would carry me. 2 officers were in the lobby, guns drawn, sweeping the area. One of them, a tall man with a serious expression, looked at me. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to form any words. But he wasn't there anymore. They searched the entire hotel, rooms, hallways, the exterior. No sign of the man. He had vanished. The police pulled the camera footage. But with the power cut, the last image captured was of him standing in the hallway of the 3rd floor, holding something in his hand. They never figured out who he was. No records, no guests by that name, no car left behind. I quit that same night. Never worked the midnight shift again. But to this day, I wonder what would have happened if he had more time in that darkness. And the worst part? Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that scratching on the door. The glass shook with the impact, a dry, brutal thud. Nicole and I jumped, our hearts racing. I knew that night wouldn't be like the others. We were at the register in the hardware store where we worked, a Home Depot in Dallas. End of shift. Last adjustments at the register. Absolute silence in the department, only the faint hum of the overhead lights above us. But that sound, that impact, that's when we saw him. On the other side of the glass door, a man was standing, his face pressed against the cold surface, eyes wide, fixed on Nicole. His lips moved slowly, forming words we couldn't hear. But the look, That look froze me to my bones. "He's back," Nicole whispered, her voice trembling. I already knew who she was talking about. His name was Richard. He had come into the store 2 weeks earlier, and since then, Nicole hadn't had a moment's peace. First, it was the usual approaches, cheap pickup lines, invitations to go out. When she rejected him, he insisted. When she rejected him again, he got aggressive. She told me that the last time he came in, he stared at her in a sickening way, with a half grin that was terrifying. Something about him just seemed wrong. But now, seeing him there, pressing his face against the glass with that empty expression, I understood that he wasn't just a persistent customer. He was something much worse. "We're closed," I yelled, hoping he would get the message and leave. But he didn't leave. He smiled. And then he said something, still silent, his lips moving slowly. "He needs to get out of the way." A chill ran up my spine. "Nico, go to the office and call the police," I whispered, never taking my eyes off him. But she didn't move. She was frozen. Richard then raised his hand and with a single violent blow punched the glass door again. This time the structure shook so hard I feared it would break. He didn't seem drunk or high. His gaze was pure hatred, pure desire to destroy, pure horror. Nicole finally moved and ran to the back of the store. My heart hammered as I tried to remain calm. But Richard didn't move. He just kept staring at me. And then he murmured something audible for the first time, almost a whisper. "If I take you out of the way, she'll be mine." I had never felt so vulnerable in my life. That's when he pulled something out of his pocket. My blood ran cold. What he was holding didn't look like a gun, but it was sharp. A knife? A pocket knife? I didn't have time to think, because in the next second he raised the object and threw it at the glass. And then everything collapsed. The glass cracked. For a moment, I thought it was going to shatter, that shards would fly everywhere. But no. The impact caused a crack to form in the center of the door, spreading like an exposed nerve. Richard smiled. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. My heart pounded. My muscles were tight, and every cell in my body screamed to run. But I couldn't. Nicole was still inside the store, in the back, calling the police. I couldn't leave her alone. I took a deep breath, swallowed the fear, and shouted, "The police have already been called, you bastard! Get out of here before they arrive!" He laughed. A low, controlled laugh, as if he were enjoying himself, as if he knew it wouldn't end there. Then he simply disappeared. A second ago he was there, smiling at me through the glass. In the next, he vanished into the darkness of the parking lot. But I knew. He was still there. The silence was heavier than the fear itself. Slowly, I backed away from the counter and moved toward the security door, locking it. Behind me, the shelves full of tools and wood cast strange shadows under the dim lighting of the store. The place seemed bigger, emptier. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not on the door, on the side of the building. My chest froze. He hadn't left. He was trying another entrance. I ran to the back where Nicole was. She was holding the phone with trembling hands. "They're on their way," she said, that her voice shaky. Another knock, this time on the side door. It was metal, but not very sturdy. If he had something to force it open, "We need to get out of here." I grabbed Nicole by the wrist. "Come with me." But now, I pulled her toward the stock corridor. There was an exit at the back, but the only way to get there was through a long corridor lined with heavy shelves. Each step echoed, each breath seemed too loud. Then we heard it. The footsteps, but not ours. They were coming from the other side of the shelves, slow, almost dragging. But they had a rhythm. He was inside. Nicole squeezed my hand hard. Her nails dug into my skin. We couldn't run. We couldn't make a sound. We moved through the corridor, one step at a time, our feet barely touching the ground. Nicole sobbed softly, and I just prayed he wouldn't hear us. Then he stopped and whispered, "I can hear you." Nicole stifled a scream. My stomach churned. I saw him through the space between the shelves. He was holding something in his hands. A wrench, heavy enough to crush a skull, and he was smiling. My body acted before my mind. I grabbed the first thing I found, a piece of metal pipe, and threw it away to the other side of the stockroom. The noise thundered in the silence. Richard turned his head immediately. I grabbed Nicole and we ran. The corridor felt endless. Blood pounded in my ears. I could hear the footsteps behind us, speeding up. The exit door was closer. Nicole reached the latch. A snap. Closed. Desperation took over. We banged, we kicked, but it wouldn't open. The footsteps behind us got closer. The air grew heavier. Richard turned the corner of the corridor and stopped. We were face to face. His eyes were dark, wild. The wrench hung from his hand. He raised his arm. That's when the blue and red lights flashed across the parking lot. Siren, screams. Richard turned his head, confused, and ran. He threw himself against the side door and vanished into the night. The police arrived seconds later. They searched the area, ransacked the parking lot, but he had vanished. Nicole cried. I felt my whole body trembling. After that night, we never saw him again, but the fear stayed. For months, I looked over my shoulder. I waited to see him on every corner. Every shadow seemed to hide that sickening smile. Richard was never caught. He's still out there, and I know he will come back to hunt Nicole. He's a psychopath, and he thinks Nicole is his. I had never been the type to get scared easily. I worked the night shift at a cargo warehouse in Detroit, and after a few months in this job, you get used to the darkness, the strange noises, the feeling of being alone in a giant silent place. But some things you never get used to. At first, it was just small annoyances, sounds I couldn't explain. The feeling that there was someone else there with me when, in reality, I was the only one in the building. But when I started seeing it with my own eyes, I knew something was terribly wrong. And that night, I discovered I wasn't alone. The warehouse where I work is massive, a labyrinth of narrow corridors formed by metal shelves that reach from floor to ceiling. During the day, it's a chaotic mess of forklifts zigzagging between boxes and employees shouting orders. At night, it's a tomb. My job was simple: organize the stock and prepare the pallets for the morning deliveries. Solitary, monotonous work. And honestly, I preferred it that way, until I started noticing things. The first time something really bothered me was on a Thursday. I was restocking goods at the back of the warehouse when I heard the sound of something falling, a loud metallic crash echoing through the empty aisles. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my flashlight and walked through the warehouse, my footsteps echoing on the cold concrete. When I reached the spot where the noise had come from, I saw a pile of boxes scattered on the ground. But there was something strange. Those boxes had been perfectly stacked just moments before. There were no windows open, no draft strong enough to knock them down. And then, as I bent down to restack the boxes, I felt it, that feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I looked around the aisles. Everything seemed normal, until I noticed a movement in my peripheral vision. Something, or someone moved quickly between the shelves, disappearing into the darkness. I stood still. I held my breath. I tried to convince myself it was just a play of shadows, a reflection from the flashlight, a big rat, anything. But what my instincts were screaming. But from that night on, the feeling of not being alone never left me. In the following days, I started noticing patterns. The noises became more frequent, a distant sound of footsteps echoing through the halls when I knew no one else was there. Objects moving, tools disappearing from one place and reappearing in another, completely different spot. But nothing prepared me for what happened the following week. It was around 1 a.m. I was checking inventory when I decided to review the security cameras in the office of the warehouse. I knew I was being paranoid and wanted to see if I was imagining things. But I wasn't. On the screen, the warehouse hallways were empty, no sign of movement. Everything seemed normal until one of the cameras flickered. For less than a second, the image distorted, and then there it was, a silhouette, a tall, motionless figure in the middle of one of the aisles. My throat went dry. The image flickered again, and the figure disappeared. A chill ran down my spine. I knew exactly where that camera was pointing. It was in aisle 12, and that aisle was only a few meters from where I was. I turned slowly, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Nothing. The aisle was empty, but I knew it was there. After that, my nights were never the same. Every time I did my rounds, I had the feeling that someone was hiding between the shelves, watching me. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was just tired, until that night when I finally saw it. I was organizing a pallet at the back of the warehouse when something made me stop. A cold sensation, like the air around me had become heavier. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps getting closer to me. I froze. I turned quickly, and there it was. A few meters from me, at the end of the aisle, a motionless figure. Tall, thin, wearing a dirty uniform, the same one as the day shift crew, the face hidden in the shadows. I stood frozen, my heart racing. "Hey, who's there?" My voice came out shakier than I'd like. No response. He didn't move, didn't blink, made no sound. I stared at that thing for seconds that felt like hours. My body screamed for me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. And then he took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I dropped the clipboard, spun on my heels, and ran. Ran like I never had in my life. The warehouse corridors seemed endless, but I knew my only chance was to reach the office and lock the door. Behind me, the footsteps started to speed up. He was running after me. Every muscle in my body screamed, but I kept going, almost tripping, feeling the panic rising in my throat. The office door was just a few meters away. I could hear him right behind me. I touched the doorknob, shoved the door open with force, and slammed it behind me. I locked it. Adrenaline kept me from breathing properly. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grab my radio. Silence. I could feel him on the other side of the door. I pressed my head against the wood, trying to listen. Nothing. Just my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the room. Then, when I thought I was safe, the doorknob moved. The doorknob slowly turned. Every muscle in my body tensed. The air was stuck in my throat. I was alone. The office was small, no windows, no other exit. If that door opened, there would be nowhere to run. The doorknob stopped. Silence. I stood there, frozen, waiting, listening. Then came the sound, a slow scratching on the door, like something was dragging its nails across the metal. Bile rose in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to stay quiet, to stay still. I held my breath and slowly pulled away, never taking my eyes off the door. Suddenly, my radio on my waist crackled. The sound echoed through the tiny office like thunder. My soul nearly left my body. On the other side of the door, the scratching stopped, and then knocks. 3 loud knocks. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. But what would I do? Open the door? Wait until my shift was over, hoping it would leave? My radio crackled again. This time, a voice. "Everything okay over there?" The security guard outside the building. It took me a few seconds to respond. My voice came out dry and shaky. "There's someone in here." There was silence on the other side. Then the response, "Impossible. The building is locked." I closed my eyes, trying not to panic. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I saw someone in the hallway. Another silence. Longer this time. Then his voice sounded quieter. "Where exactly are you now?" My mouth went dry. I looked at the door as if it were about to explode at any moment. In the stock office. The radio crackled louder and louder, and then his voice came through, firm. "Get out. Now." His tone wasn't from someone who thought I was imagining things. It was the tone of someone who knew something. My pulse raced. I tried to think. The only exit was through that door. I placed my hand on the doorknob, closed my eyes, and gathered all the courage I had left. I twisted and pulled. The hallway was empty. The silence was deafening. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights broke the stillness of the place. My breath was shallow, my steps unsteady. I ran for the exit. If you've survived this far and you're one of those who love fear and real terror, then don't waste any time. I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any content. The video you're watching on screen is just a taste of what's coming. Watch it. Thank you for being here, and see you next time, if you're capable of handling what's to come.